For centuries, a single explosive statement from Jesus has been whispered, debated, and often deliberately buried. It is a phrase so profound, so paradigm-shifting, that if truly understood, it could redefine everything you thought you knew about your own existence and your place in the cosmos. Jesus looked his listeners in the eye and declared, "You are gods." But that was not the only dangerous thing he said. Hidden across the deepest layers of early Christian teaching is another revelation just as unsettling: that human beings are not merely creatures of dust and limitation, but beings of light. Beings whose true origin is not in this broken world, but in a higher reality. And that raises the question that almost no one dares to ask openly. Why has virtually no one explained what those words really mean? Why has so much of Christianity focused on sin, weakness, guilt, and unworthiness, while passing quietly over the possibility that Jesus was pointing to something far greater hidden within the human soul? Stay with us, because today we are pulling back the veil on one of the most dangerous and transformative ideas in spiritual history: that Jesus did not come merely to tell people to worship the light. He came to remind them that they came from it. What makes this so difficult for most people to hear is that it challenges the entire psychological structure of how religion is usually presented. Most people are taught to think of the divine as distant, absolute, above them, outside them, forever separate from them. But if Jesus says, "You are gods," and if early Christian texts preserve sayings in which human beings are described as coming from the light, then the whole picture changes. Then the issue is no longer how to become worthy of the divine, but how to awaken to what is already buried within you. And once that shift happens, religion stops being merely about obedience and becomes something far more intimate, far more unsettling, and far more liberating. The line most people know comes from the Gospel of John, where Jesus says, "Is it not written in your law, I said you are gods?" It is one of the most startling things ever placed in the mouth of Jesus because of how calmly it appears. There is no dramatic announcement around it, no thunder, no attempt to soften its force. He simply says it as if he expects his audience to understand the implications. But they rarely do, because the moment that statement is taken seriously, it opens a door that many institutions have spent centuries trying to keep closed. Jesus is quoting from Psalm 82, where human beings are addressed in divine language. But the deeper question is not just why he quoted it. The deeper question is why he chose that line in that moment. He is defending himself against accusations of blasphemy, and his response is essentially this: your own scriptures already contain the language of human divinity. In other words, the idea that there is something godlike about the human being is not alien to the tradition. It is already there. Hidden, yes. Rarely explained, yes. But there. Now most later interpretations rush to reduce that statement into something symbolic and harmless. They say Jesus only meant judges, rulers, or representatives. But even if that were true, it would not remove the deeper issue. Why would sacred language ever be applied to human beings at all, unless there were already an ancient intuition that humanity carries something more than biological life, something more than intellect, more than personality, more than flesh, something luminous, something originating from beyond this world? And this is where the teaching begins to turn. Because Jesus does not simply speak about people as weak creatures begging for grace. He repeatedly speaks as though something in them is asleep, something waiting, something not yet recognized. And once you notice that pattern, the statement, "You are gods," stops sounding like an isolated anomaly and starts sounding like a key. The Gospel of John is one of the most mystical books in the New Testament because it does not speak only in terms of events. It speaks in terms of realities behind events. It is filled with the language of light, life, birth from above, spirit, truth, and union. It begins not with a manger or genealogy, but with the Word, the Logos, the eternal principle through which all things were made. And then it says something extraordinary. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Not the light of angels, not the light of heaven alone, the light of men. That single phrase is easy to miss, but its implications are immense. It suggests that the light associated with the Logos is not merely something Christ possesses as an external object, It is the light of humanity itself at the deepest level. It is the hidden life inside the human being. John continues, saying that this light shines in darkness, and the darkness does not comprehend it. Again, the message is subtle but explosive. The problem is not that the light is absent. The problem is that it is not comprehended, not recognized, not consciously lived. That pattern continues throughout John. Jesus speaks of being born from above, of knowing the truth in a way that makes one free, of abiding in Him as branches abide in the vine, of the kingdom not as a political order, but as participation in divine life. The surface reading sees theology, the deeper reading sees awakening. John is not merely telling you who Jesus is, he is telling you what Jesus reveals about what human beings are capable of becoming conscious of. And once the Gospel of John is read through that lens, the phrase, "You are God's," no longer stands alone. It becomes part of a larger vision. Human beings are beings in whom the light can shine. Beings capable of truth, not because truth is foreign to them, but because they are secretly made for it. Beings who can awaken to the divine because the divine is not wholly outside them. Now when we move to the Gospel of Thomas, the language becomes even more direct. Thomas does not tell a story in the usual sense. It offers sayings, compact, sharp, dangerous statements that feel less like religious instruction and more like keys to unlock perception. And among those sayings, there is one that speaks directly to our subject with startling clarity. Jesus says, "If they say to you, 'Where have you come from?' say to them, 'We have come from the light,' or from the place where the light came into being by itself, established itself, and appeared in their image." That is not ordinary religious language. That is not the language of moral instruction. That is the language of origin, the language of spiritual identity, the language of remembering where the human soul came from. If taken seriously, this saying changes everything, because it suggests that human beings are not simply earthbound beings trying to climb their way to heaven. They are beings whose deepest origin is already in the realm of light. Their tragedy is not that they were never connected to it. Their tragedy is that they forgot. Thomas repeatedly returns to this idea. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known. If you do not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty. These are not just abstract spiritual riddles, they are direct statements about identity. The poverty Jesus describes is not material poverty, it is the poverty of self-forgetfulness, the failure to know what one truly is. And once you place Thomas beside John, something extraordinary happens. John gives you the language of the light within humanity. Thomas gives you the language of humanity's origin in the light itself. John shows the Logos as the light of men. Thomas shows Jesus saying that we have come from the light. Put them together, and the picture becomes almost impossible to ignore. Jesus is not simply telling people to believe in a distant divine source. He is telling them to remember that their deepest being is rooted in it. If this is already shifting the way you see yourself, take a moment right now to like the video, subscribe to Mythical Gnosis, and comment, "We came from the light." Because this is the kind of teaching most people were never encouraged to sit with deeply. And the deeper we go, the more clearly everything begins to connect. Now we need to slow down and ask the most important question of all. What does it actually mean to say that human beings are beings of light? It does not mean the shallow version of spirituality people often hear today, vague positivity, ego inflation, or the fantasy that human beings are already perfect at the level of their personality. That is not what the deeper teachings are saying. The light here does not refer to the surface self. It refers to essence, to the deepest stratum of being, to the uncorrupted center hidden beneath conditioning, fear, memory, trauma, ambition, and social identity. To say that a human being comes from the light is to say that what they most deeply are did not originate in the darkness of confusion, control, and fragmentation. Their deepest ground is higher than that. And their core is not the world's distortion of them. Their core is something prior, something that cannot be fully reduced to the body, the ego, or the story of a single lifetime. And this explains why human life feels the way it does. Why there is always a tension between what we are told to be and what something deeper inside us knows. Why even in success there is restlessness. Why even in distraction there is longing. Why even in conformity there is resistance. The light inside the human being does not disappear just because it is forgotten. It remains, quiet, buried, pressing against the walls of identity, trying to be recognized. This is why the teaching is so dangerous. Because once people stop identifying only with the outer self, they become harder to control, harder to manipulate, harder to shame, harder to define. A person who truly suspects that their essence comes from the light does not remain psychologically available to systems of fear in the same way. And that is precisely why such teachings are tolerated only as metaphor, never as lived reality. The Gospel of Philip takes this further by shifting the focus from origin to recognition. It suggests again and again that what people see is shaped by what they are capable of perceiving. Human beings do not necessarily see reality as it is. They see it as they are conditioned to see it. The same is true spiritually. If someone is trapped in appearances, then the divine remains hidden even when it is near. If someone recognizes what is real, then even the ordinary begins to reveal a hidden depth. One of the themes Philip returns to is that what is hidden becomes known through likeness. You recognize what you are akin to. You perceive the divine because something in you is already related to it. This is one of the most profound and unsettling implications of the entire Gnostic tradition. You do not awaken to the light because it is alien to you. You awaken to it because it is your source. There is already a resonance between the human soul and the divine reality it dimly remembers. That is why these teachings are not about importing something new into the human being. They are about removing what obstructs recognition. The light is not manufactured, it is uncovered. The divine is not artificially added, it is remembered. And once that pattern becomes clear, the statement "you are gods" sounds less like blasphemy and more like diagnosis, less like self-exaltation and more like the disclosure of a hidden anthropology. And if we widen the lens and look across the Holy Bible itself, the same intuition appears in another form. In Genesis, humanity is made in the image and likeness of God. That statement has often been repeated, but rarely fully inhabited. People say it, but they do not let it breathe. Yet if human beings are made in the image of God, what does that actually imply? Surely more than morality alone. Surely more than mere representation. It suggests resemblance at some deep ontological level. It suggests that there is something in human beings that mirrors the divine. Now, later traditions often immediately move to human failure, fallenness, weakness, corruption. And those themes are real within the biblical narrative. But what gets forgotten is that failure only matters because of what humanity originally carries. And the crisis is not that humans were always worthless and needed value injected into them. The crisis is that beings made in the image of God forgot what they were aligned to. They turned away from living in that likeness consciously. And if that is so, then Jesus' statement in John does not appear as a rupture from the biblical tradition. It appears as a deep unveiling of it, the image of God in man, the light of men. You are gods. These are not random fragments. They are related intuitions emerging from different angles. The Bible itself contains the seeds of a far more radical view of the human being than later simplifications often allowed. At this point, a difficult question becomes unavoidable. If all of this is present in Scripture and early Christian tradition, why was it never allowed to become central? Why was the emphasis redirected toward weakness, guilt, distance, and dependence? Because a spirituality centered on inner divine recognition changes the entire power structure of religion. If people recognize that the kingdom is within, that they come from the light, that the image of God is real, and that Jesus himself used divine language for human beings, then mediation changes, control changes, authority changes, fear changes. The relationship between institution and individual changes. That was too dangerous. So the words remained, but the frame changed. The language of divine identity was tolerated only within boundaries. It could be quoted, but not lived to literally. Admired, but not activated. Preserved, but never fully explained. Over time, this produced a very specific kind of religious psychology, one in which people were encouraged to think of themselves primarily as unworthy, broken, separate, and dependent. And although humility has a sacred place, that structure easily becomes something else when cut off from the truth of deeper identity. It becomes chronic spiritual inferiority. The early Gnostic texts were dangerous precisely because they threatened that inferiority. They told people that the light was within, that self-knowledge was essential, that forgetting one's origin was the real poverty, and that Christ came as revealer as much as redeemer. Once you see that, you understand why certain teachings were pushed to the margins. If this is opening something in you, don't just watch quietly. Like the video, subscribe to Mythical Gnosis, and comment, "Oh no, the light is within." Because this conversation only gets deeper from here, and the next layers are where the hidden pattern becomes impossible to ignore. One of the strongest arguments for this teaching is not textual, it is existential. It is the structure of human experience itself. Why are human beings restless in a way no animal is? Why do they hunger for eternity while living in time? Why do they feel an ache that no achievement satisfies? Why do they long for truth, beauty, transcendence, justice, and meaning in ways that constantly exceed the physical requirements of survival? A shallow explanation says this is just psychology. A deeper explanation says it is evidence. Evidence that the human being is not reducible to the system they inhabit. Evidence that something in them exceeds the world's ability to satisfy it. Evidence that their deepest ground is from elsewhere. If you come from the light, then darkness cannot fully feel like home. If you carry a divine spark, then no amount of material comfort can silence the inner pressure of transcendence. If you are made in the image of God, then reduction to animal appetite and social identity will always feel insufficient. Human restlessness is not simply a defect, it may be the soul's memory of origin. And that is exactly what the Gospel of Thomas implies when it speaks of self-knowledge and poverty. The real poverty is not lacking possessions, it is lacking remembrance. The real exile is not geographic, it is metaphysical. It is to live in a world of surfaces while forgetting the light from which you came. This is why the figure of Jesus becomes so explosive in the early mystical tradition. It's because he is not only the one who saves in a legal or sacrificial sense, he is also the one who reveals, the one who exposes the true condition of the human being, the one who says, in effect, that what you are seeking outside yourself is hidden at the root of your being. This is not a denial of devotion, it is a deepening of it. Because in this framework, to follow Christ does not simply mean to admire him. It means to awaken to what he awakens in you. It means to recognize the same light he points toward. It means to move from dependency into conscious participation. That is why so many of his sayings sound cryptic. They are not cryptic because he wants confusion. They are cryptic because he is trying to speak to a level deeper than ordinary thought. He is trying to trigger recognition rather than mere agreement. He is not merely distributing doctrines, he is confronting consciousness itself. Let us return again to Thomas, because this is one of the deepest sayings in the text. If they say to you, "Where have you come from?" say to them, "We have come from the light." That is not only an answer to others, it is an answer to yourself. It is an answer to the deepest question of identity. Where have you come from? Not geographically, not historically, spiritually, ontologically, at the level of what you most deeply are. And the answer is not dust alone, not social conditioning alone, not the world alone. The answer is light. Not symbolic light in the shallow sense, but primordial reality, living consciousness, divine presence, the source beyond fragmentation, the hidden origin of being itself. Once that answer is allowed into the soul, it changes the grammar of existence. You stop seeing yourself merely as a sinner trying to become worthy, or as a creature trying to appease the divine. You begin to see yourself as a being of forgotten splendor, struggling to remember what you are and where you came from. Of course, as soon as people hear language like this, ego tries to seize it. It wants to turn "you are gods" into superiority, vanity, self-worship, spiritual inflation. But that is precisely what the deeper teaching does not mean. The surface self is not what is being divinized. The personality, the social self, the reactive ego, none of that is what the texts are pointing to. In fact, the more one recognizes the deeper light, the less obsessed one becomes with the ego. Because the ego thrives on separation, comparison, and performance. The light does not. So this teaching is not grandiosity. It is purification. It is the stripping away of false identity so that deeper identity can be recognized. It is not a claim that the ordinary self is all-powerful. It is the recognition that the deepest self is rooted in something divine and cannot be reduced to the fragments the world calls you. That distinction matters. Without it, the teaching becomes dangerous in the wrong way. With it, the teaching becomes liberating. There is something haunting in the opening of John. The light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. If we take that seriously, not only cosmically, but anthropologically, then it means something terrifying and beautiful at once. It means the light is present, and yet can remain unrecognized. It means truth can exist within a person while their conscious life remains trapped in fragmentation. It means a human being can carry divine depth and still live on the surface of themselves. This is why spiritual awakening is so disruptive. It is not the insertion of something foreign. It is the recognition of something always already there. And that is also why it feels like remembering more than learning. You do not encounter the light merely as external information. You encounter it as resonance, as the shock of truth that feels at once new and ancient. If you've made it this far, you're already deeper in this mystery than most people ever go. So subscribe to Mythical Gnosis, like the video, and comment, "We are from the light." Because this next part brings everything together, John, Thomas, Philip, and the Bible itself, into one vision. One reason this teaching became obscured is that the biblical tradition carries a tension. On one side, humanity is portrayed in dignity, image of God, breath of life, recipients of divine word, bearers of light. On the other side, humanity is portrayed in failure, forgetful, divided, exiled, destructive, blind. Later religion often emphasized the second side so strongly that the first was reduced to a footnote. But the early mystical reading keeps the tension alive. Humans are fallen, yes, but fallen from what? From meaninglessness? No. From a higher likeness. From conscious participation in divine reality. Their misery only makes sense because of their lost greatness. That is why Jesus' words matter. He is not inventing human glory. He is reminding people of a forgotten one. He is speaking into the wound of exile with language that reawakens memory. You are gods. The kingdom is within you. We have come from the light. These are not random spiritual slogans. They are fragments of a single anthropology. The human being is more than it appears, but less than it remembers itself to be, until awakening happens. Perhaps the best way to understand the human being in this teaching is not as a finished object, but as a threshold, a place where worlds meet, matter and spirit, time and eternity, forgetting and remembrance, darkness and light. That is why human life feels unstable. That is why it contains contradiction. That is why we can be capable of cruelty and yet hunger for holiness. Why we are drawn downward and upward at once. Why we are at war within ourselves. Because we are not simple beings, we are threshold beings. And Jesus' statement is addressed precisely to that threshold. He is not flattering the personality. He is calling the deeper being to awaken. He is speaking to the divine potential buried under fragmentation. When a person truly begins to take this seriously, the changes are subtle at first. They do not become superhuman. They become less hypnotized, less defined by fear, less desperate for external approval, more aware of the space between thoughts, more sensitive to the presence beneath emotion, more able to feel that the world, though real, is not ultimate. This does not remove pain. It changes its meaning. It does not erase suffering. It places suffering in a larger horizon. It does not end conflict overnight. But it makes inner slavery harder to maintain. Once the soul suspects that it comes from the light, the darkness no longer feels like unquestioned reality. It feels like interruption, distortion, a realm to move through, not the final home of identity. This is not just ancient theology. It matters now because modern life is built on almost total forgetfulness of depth. People are trained to identify with performance, image, productivity, desire, status, trauma, and narrative. They are rarely invited to ask what in them is deeper than all of that. And because they do not ask, they become easier to manage. The old teaching of inner divine identity directly opposes that condition. It tells people they are more than their utility, more than their biography, more than their wounds, more than their public identity. It tells them that at their center there is something untouched, luminous and rooted beyond the world's definitions. That is still dangerous now, maybe more dangerous than ever, because a person who knows that cannot be fully consumed by the systems around them. Now we arrive at the most dangerous possibility of all. What if Jesus did not come merely to be admired, worshipped, or obeyed? What if part of his mission was to reveal the hidden stature of the human being? What if the scandal of "you are gods" is not that it makes too much of humanity, but that it exposes how much humanity has forgotten itself? What if the tragedy is not that humans aim too high, but that they have been taught to think too lowly of their deepest being? What if all of history's spiritual control systems depend, at least in part, on keeping people identified only with the lower self, the fearful, fractured, reactive self, while the deeper light remains unrecognized? This is why the teaching was never allowed to dominate, because it produces a different kind of human being. A human being who seeks truth inwardly as well as outwardly. A human being who cannot be governed by shame in the same way. A human being who begins to live from recognition rather than fear. And so we return once more to the opening statement, but now it sounds different. Not like a slogan, not like a mystery meant only to intrigue. It sounds like a revelation standing in plain sight, waiting for someone to hear it with enough seriousness to let it work on them. You are gods. You came from the light. The light is the life of men. The kingdom is within you. Know yourselves. Bring forth what is within you. When placed side by side, these are not random lines from scattered texts. They are facets of one vision, a vision of humanity as light-bearing, image-bearing, divinely rooted, but spiritually asleep. In a vision in which Christ does not only save from outside, but awakens from within. A vision in which the true crisis is not merely moral guilt, but metaphysical forgetfulness. And if that vision is true, then the central task of life changes. It is no longer merely to conform, it is to remember, to awaken, to recognize the light within and live from it consciously. So now the question is no longer simply, did Jesus really say we are gods? He did. The deeper question is what he meant, and what it means for you now. If you are a being from the realm of light, then the world's description of you is incomplete. If the divine spark is real, then your restlessness makes sense. If the kingdom is within, then the search outside must eventually turn inward. If Jesus spoke this way deliberately, then his teaching was far more radical than most people were ever encouraged to see. And once you begin to really sit with that, something changes. Not all at once, but decisively. You stop seeing yourself only as a surface identity. You begin to sense the deeper presence beneath thought, beneath fear, beneath the world's definitions. And that presence changes how you move through reality. Because once you begin to remember the light, there is no way to become fully comfortable with darkness again. If this mystery pulled you in, subscribe to Mythical Gnosis, like the video and comment, "I remember the light." And when this video ends, go straight to the next one. Because the next question is even more dangerous. If human beings came from the light, then who or what benefits from keeping them asleep? Watch that next on Mythical Gnosis. Because the deeper we go, the stranger, sharper, and more revealing these hidden teachings become.